Well, the 9650 made it a friend. So I'm going to answer your question of, huh? Right after this. Welcome back. If you haven't seen my videos before, I'm Rouse the Oliver Man. 9650 you've seen before. This you have not. 7040. This tractor here was dropped off yesterday. It belongs to a friend of mine who he used to work at the school the same time I did. When I was doing maintenance on the buses, he was doing maintenance on the buildings. And we both quit about the same time from that gig. And anyway, his daughters play basketball, and since I haul the basketball team to the games, we'd sit together and talk and whatever. And he asked one day, he said, "Hey, can you work on my tractor?" And I said, "Yeah, but it's the middle of winter and I don't like working outside." So, you know, he didn't have a good place indoors for me to work. So I said, when it gets warmer, we'll take care of it. And I just have never made it back over there. And the other day he called and he said, "Hey, what time are you going to be home?" He said, "I got my trailer hooked up." He said, "I'll just run it out there to you." And I said, "That would be perfect." So we're going to tackle this. Now, it's here because it has a leak in this filter housing here. I mean, it's a pretty steady stream. So we're going to be, you know, dealing with that. It's more than likely O-ring behind this fitting, I believe, is what our issue is. But it's an oily mess in a lot of places. So, like, we'll probably end up doing that one too to get that cleaned up. And then I said, "Hey, you probably want a valve cover gasket, don't you?" And he said, "Is that what's leaking?" And I said, "More than likely." So if we change that out, clean that all up and change that, that is another thing on our list. And that might clean up a lot of this other jazz here. I'll probably clean that off just to make sure that it's not leaking. This is your valve that's connected to your clutch. Then it also has he said he thought it was leaking over here where these two lines go in. And if I remember correctly, it's been many moons since I've worked on one of these, but there's actually 3 pumps in a line here. There's 2 here, and inside is a gerotor pump. And so that's what those lines go to. So we need to clean that all up and get it nice and warm and make sure it's not leaking, even if we have to take those fittings out, reseal. There is a gasket underneath that possibly maybe needs replaced. And actually there's several things we could replace under there gasket wise. But yeah, because see, we're leaking fluid here. There's a big tube that goes in there. This piece comes off. I can't remember if there's a filter in there or if it's just a screen. I'll have to look at the parts book. There are filters on either side of this, I believe, if I remember right. One of them I think is a spinning filter. Maybe that's on an 8000 series, I don't know. Like I said, it's been a while. I'm gonna have to look at the parts book and it'll all come back to me. I just know that that's a fun time, working on your back, trying to get that stuff up in there and out of there. But yeah, I mean, I don't want to just start spending money like mad for him, but we're gonna fix the stuff that is leaking because that's what he wants. And he also brought me filters and oil, and he said, "If you got time, why don't you just change the oil?" And I said, "Absolutely." So, but yeah, this is an oily mess, and most of that is most likely from the valve cover. So if we get that cleaned off, I think we'll be on the right side of things. What to say about these? Well, if I recall correctly, the first tractor of this body style was the 7030, and it came as open station naturally. And basically it's about the same. I mean, they made refinements over time, and if I get this right, the 7000, which is just it's like the replacement for the 200, 100 horsepower tractor. My neighbor that had the 9650 had a 7000. His dad bought brand new. It was over there. Pretty rough old horse, but I'd like to have it if he ever wanted to sell it, just because I remember seeing it as a kid. So your 7000 was a replacement for a 200. It used a 301 engine, and the rear end on it had a 3-speed power shift on them all, or a 3-speed. I don't want to say power shift because they had a power shift. It's different. So the maroon belly tractors like this first used in all the sizes, a gear shift like up in the center of the transmission. You can see in there. The ones that were black bellies, which is what my neighbor had a T-handle shifter on the console, and I thought that was the coolest thing. However, not as reliable as the center shifter, because as stuff would wear, that T-handle thing would get a lot of slop in it. And I think you had 5 speeds there, and you had 2 speeds on the floor, high and low, and then you had the 3-speed on the 7000 only. So that would give you what, 5? That'd be 15. I don't know. I was thinking they were around 20 speeds when you figured all the hydraulic power shift stuff together, but I might be wrong on that. Don't quote me. I just know that the 7000 was the only one that had a 3-speed deal, and that might be what it is. It might have been you had high and low range, 3 speeds on the go, and 5 gears, however much that works out to. Anyway, so you had 7000, that was a replacement for a 200. Then you had like later on they had the 7010 and the 7020. Those tractors were still 301 engine, but I think they had a little bit different rear end, more like what's in line with this here, which is a different thing. You'll see in a minute. We'll go inside and look at it. Then when you got up to 7030 and above, those tractors had a 426. And so that is what this one has. And this is an excellent running tractor. I mean, 426 motor they used in everything. The 301 motor they used in everything. I think the 301 was probably a little bit better motor than this, but I don't know. This thing was pretty well pushed to its limit. I mean, they used it in combines and stuff. The 301, though, that is a tough little motor. I mean, I've seen it turned way, way up where it was putting out as much horsepower as this or more, and probably wouldn't handle that all day long plowing, but it's just a well-built motor. So anyway, I'm not up on what years stuff happened on these orange ones, but you know, there's 7030, 7040, there was a 7045, a 7050, 7060, and a 7080. And of course, 426 motor, they just kept turning the screw up, getting more horsepower each time. Basically the same identical tractor. And some of those, like 7045, you know, that stuff, 7050s, they were only available certain years. The model numbers changed based on the year, but overall they were pretty well all the same tractor, just either a different era or different setting on the injection pump, you know. The early maroon belly tractors had this bump out thing on the cab. By the black bellies, it was just straight flat, which, you know, I guess that's a matter of preference, what you like if you were going to hunt one down. These cabs are not the most fun to get in, but once you're in there, they're pretty good. However, I still think this is easier to get in than a like a Soundguard John Deere cab, I think, or even a year-round cab. This is much better. Not as much room as the later cabs, but hey, cabs were, you know, still a thing of the future at this point. And I have to remember all my stuff about these. See, like on this one, you have a park position, and then this lever, you got a low, which is the turtle, and then a high. So you got your range there. You've got 5 speeds here and then you've got two on the floor. These buttons are a hydraulic on-the-go shift. This one you have to stop to put it in one or the other, and same way with the gear, but this you can hit on the go. So that would give you what, 5, 10, 10, 20. So this is what they call the 20-speed transmission, because you have 2 speeds there, 2 speeds there, and 5 gears. So if you had any range here, you would have 5, and then you could do 10, and then you hit that button, that gives you 20 different choices, I guess you'd say, is what I'm thinking, if I remember correctly. Then of course you have 2 remotes, and you have a 3-point lever, your PTO back here, and yeah, I don't know what else to say about it. It's an all metal cab, so it's kind of echoey in here now, you see. This one's missing all the, although I don't know, maybe these maroon belly ones didn't have the cab kit like the later ones, because there's decals and stuff stuck here. But I know we put cab kits in some of them, and they would wrap around these posts and stuff, so maybe that was a black belly thing. But anyway, this tractor, he told me when he bought it, it only had like a couple thousand hours, and right now it's got 4,900 hours. It was bought by a couple brothers, and they had used it as a corn planting tractor. Then they quit planting corn. The tractor just sat. This guy bought it probably around 2002, 3, 4, somewhere in there. And, you know, he's done a little bit with it ever since. He's done hay with it. But yeah, it's an orange one. He said the multi-gauge there quit working, so he put in a mechanical temperature gauge just so he knew what, you know, he wasn't getting too hot. I don't know, we can try it, but I'm not sure if the air conditioner still works in it or not. I don't know. I'd kind of doubt it, but maybe I'm wrong. But these old cabs, I mean, you can open every window on them pretty well, both sides, the back. The biggest flaw, I think, in their design with these, why didn't they make this a door like the other side? It comes out. I mean, it's just bolted in. That panel, they could have very easily made it a door, and I'd say that if a guy wanted to, you know, you could make it into a door, but they should have, because it is a real pain when you got to work on something here in the cab and you can only do it through that hole, especially if you're pretty good size, you know. So that's how that goes. But let's run it around here and see what we got. Now these, you got to do this to get it to run. Okay. Ain't got nothing. There we go. What a sweetheart. Fires right up. Oh, we're still in park. So you got to pick a range, and then you got to go like that. That's probably too high a range. If I hit the floor button, what happens? That's even more. Let's pick a lower gear. When you hit the clutch, that floor button returns to the other position. If you saw that, we'll do that again. So if I hit this button, it picks up in speed, but when I hit the clutch, it pops back to the other range. This is a hydraulic clutch, and so if you're not used to it, it's a lot more jumpy than something else, you know. And they're supposed to have a brake, so when you hit this clutch, it should come to a halting stop here in a minute. Maybe this one is not quite an adjustment, but a lot of times yeah, there I felt it go. And why they did that is so you can easily shift gears without grinding. But that's another thing you got to be used to, because when you step on the clutch on some of these, it stops. So let's put that back in park and we'll go assess our situation outside. These are supposed to catch up in there to hold the door open while you get out. That's one thing that Oliver pretty well had everybody beat on that deal. I mean, it's not nearly like the ones we have. I mean, yesterday it started dripping, but it's not doing it now, of course. There it goes. Yeah, we can see it dripping up there. So that needs attention. Gee. I don't think it did that yesterday. Something in there doesn't sound too happy. Don't know what that was. Yeah, I don't know what that was. It sounded kind of clunky in that area back there, but don't know. That's not what it's here for. All right. I think that one of my GoPro batteries is no good because it seems like when it is in the camera, it always messes up. So I set that one aside and we'll just deal with that later. But yeah, this sucker here seems to be a decent old tractor. I did notice though while driving it, it sounded like there was a little rattling in there. Maybe that's nothing to be concerned of. These have like a torque limiter thing in there, which has springs and what have you. It's not really a true clutch is what I'm saying. It has that torque limiter to give it some flexibility, but this is basically like hydraulic driving in a way, because your clutch is actually, it's not connected to what you think of as a clutch. It's connected to this valve and it dumps the pressure and then you quit moving. And then, you know, it has hydraulic, that high-low thing is hydraulic on the floor. Is it like a valve that does that? And then your shifter thing should be hooked to the top of the transmission, and it has a high-low deal there, and that's mechanical. But basically the hydraulics on these are a big deal. I mean, if you got a hydraulic problem, you're done for the day, and you better be, because you'll ruin the rear end if you don't. Case in point, we worked on a 7000. I believe it was a black belly 7000. The guy was driving down the road and one of the hydraulic lines under here sprung a leak. It sprayed against the tire. He couldn't see it in the cab and he kept going. Well, it got down to where the old transmission was just practically glowing and didn't have no oil in it anymore. And it locked up on the road, left skid marks. I mean, that's it. No rolling, nothing. So they took the truck out there where I worked and, you know, winched it up on there, dragging it the whole way. You know, if you kind of oil the floor of the trailer, it'll slide up decent-ish. We brought it into the shop and we had to cut bearings out of the transmission because it had locked up solid. It welded bearings to the shaft, ruined. Now, this is a sad story too, because, and I know it was frustrating when this is happening to us, but the guy was an older guy. He didn't think he was going to be farming that many more years anyway, but he needed his tractor, but he didn't want to spend a ton of money. And if you got to go into the transmission on one of these, you better plan on spending some money, just because that's the way it is. I mean, parts expensive and it takes a long time to do it. I mean, you're gutting the hole, splitting the tractor, rolling the back end away from underneath. That's what we did so we could work on it. So the old feller's idea was, why don't you just try to reuse everything you can and only, you know, only put 2 new bearings on that shaft that locked up and then reuse everything else. Weren't really wild about that idea, but that's what he wanted. So we did that. Cut the bearings off the bottom shaft. It seemed like it was fine. Put it back together with the 2 new bearings on that shaft. Great deal. He takes it home, drives it home. It was maybe 2 days later. He was putting on anhydrous or something with it, and he said, something ain't right. It sounds like it's whining like an old co-op tractor or something. You better come get it and check it out. So me and my buddy went out there and took the truck again. The tractor was still in the field in the corn rows where he stopped right there. We unhooked it from that bar, drove it out to the road, and it was whining. Drove it up on the trailer, took it back to the shop, unloaded it, drove it around the parking lot to let the other guy hear it, and the longer we drove it, the worse it got. So one of the bearings was already going out, is what it amounted to, which meant split it again. So that was a sad story because, you know, what do? It's not all his fault and it's not all our fault. So just try to make it right as quick as possible and not, you know. So that time we took it apart, and I don't remember what became of it that time, but I'm thinking that we put it back together again, and the old guy still didn't want to do everything. I can't remember how that was, but the moral of the story is we ended up doing it a 3rd time, and the 3rd time everything got replaced. Every piece was new, all the bearings, everything, because stuff in there must have just got too hot, and I don't know, but he wanted it. It was his idea. He wanted to try to reuse as much as possible, and that's a losing deal for us because we were out labor, some of the labor. I mean, he still had to pay, but he had more in that tractor than it will ever be worth. And I guess my moral of the story is transmissions are expensive to rebuild, and so 2 things are, number 1, always check your oil, because on these especially, your hydraulics is your transmission oil. So if you have an implement that leaks all day and you're using it, why, you're losing capacity in your tractor the whole time, and eventually bad things will happen. And then number 2 lesson from that is, no matter how expensive you think that's going to be, go ahead and replace everything while you're in there, because it's not worth it to try to reuse pieces. I mean, if it's gotten hot enough that it locked up, just do it all right away. I mean, it looked good. We looked at the stuff and it looked good. It didn't look like it was going to be any problem at all, but it was. After just a few more hours, stuff kept failing until we just put it all in new. So yeah, that tractor was possessed by demons because it was there a bunch for different situations that it would get itself into. The 3-speed valve on it was never quite right. And the other guy took it apart in there one day and he finally figured it out. It was never right since that guy bought it. The guy had bought it used years ago, and it just wasn't quite performing like it should. And when he took it apart, he figured out that 2 of the spools had gotten switched. And even though they look identical, just like hydraulic valves, your spools are pretty well matched to the bore. You can't just get a spool out of a junkyard tractor and slap her in and go, because you're probably going to have leaks or it's going to be poor performance. They're pretty well a match set at that point, so you need, you know, to not mix it up. And like he said, usually when he would rebuild these 3-speed valves on the 7000s, he'd do 1 bore at a time, take the spool out, you know, put it back in, whatever. And whoever did it must have just slapped it all out, threw it in a pan and cleaned everything up and then put it back together. Well, they had it all mixed up. So yeah, but anyway, that was another instance of that 7000 that was possessed by demons. It was there for motor work. I remember working on something, had the head off of it, I think, once. And the injectors wouldn't come out of it. And that was enough. I mean, it fought us every time it was there. And who knows why, because it looked like it was in excellent shape and it looked like it was taken care of, but it just did not want to play ball. So yeah, this was probably the biggest seller or series, I would say, that the dealer I worked for sold. I mean, this was like their heyday. I think they sold a lot of 7,000 series tractors of all the sizes. You know, by that point that they started up, it was pretty well out of the 100 series. Well, I can't say that. They did sell, like the 200 my dad has was sold new by them, but it was the tail end of like the 190s, and it was starting to get into this era of stuff. So there was a lot of these out there at one time in this county, especially over on the opposite end of the county that was a little closer to them. And it seemed like every farm down there had Allis Chalmers. You know, Allis Chalmers and Oliver were probably some of the biggest ones around. I mean, there was a lot of internationals too. I really don't think John Deere was that big around here till later on. But I mean, there were always guys who had their pick, and they were die-hard, you know, Deere or IH or whatever. But they held their own around here. I mean, there was a lot of these. So, and like I said, the engines on them were pretty well tried and true. I mean, I don't think that there was a lick of trouble with these motors at this point, because the 426 had been used in like the 210 and 220, and the 301 motor had been used in the 190s and 200s and all that. So the power plant was not a issue. The rear end and hydraulics and all that, there was some issues. I think when they first came out, they had to get ironed out. I know the guy told me when they first came out, like at the 7030s, they were shearing off bolts. They'd use bolts to bolt something inside here. I don't remember what, the ring gear to the carrier or whatever, and it would shear all the bolts off like if you were plowing. So Allis Chalmers recalled it and made them do, I don't remember what the fix was, but the point was you had twisted off bolts you had to get out, and that was a problem the way it was. And I don't know how they solved it exactly, but I do know what they said they did. They could do it faster, because they figured out that instead of tearing it all the way down to get the broken bolts out, they could take a welding rod and stick it in there, or stick it to another bolt, and then stick it in that hole, and it would weld itself to the other one, and then they could back it out, because see, everything in there is running in oil, so it wasn't tight. But they could do it in so much quicker time that Allis Chalmers sent somebody down and said, what's the deal? How can you have done that many tractors? When they turned in how many they had done of the updates to, they said, we're paying you for so many hours. How is it possible that you can't physically have done that many tractors? And they said, yeah, because we figured out how to do it better. So anyway, there was that. After they switched that problem, I don't think they had any trouble with that again. The only other thing that comes to mind that was a trouble on these tractors that I know we even did a lot of still was the 7000, even, not these bigger ones, had a lot of reverse gear trouble. The reverse gears would go out of them. It'd chew the corners off the teeth, and then it wouldn't stay in reverse. And so the 7000 up here has a flat plate, just a steel flat plate on the top of the transmission. Doesn't have all the lift arm stuff like this in it. It's just the top is flat, and it's a flat steel plate. And so if it had a cab on it especially, that was a tough order, because you had to work way up in there to do what you were doing. So what I did was, he told me, he said, I think that it's possible that you could do it without splitting the tractor. So I thought, well, I'm going to try. And So what we did is took that cover off the back, took the floorboard out of the cab, because there was a cover in there you had to take up so you could work in there on both sides of the wall in the transmission, because the rail had to come out so you could have enough room to pull the gear out. And I welded a bolt on the end of a piece of rod that I could stick down in there with my pry bar and then just keep pushing against that shaft until it backed out enough that I could reach in there and slide the gear off the end, pull it out, drop a new gear in, and then go to the back side, push the shaft back forward, lock it down, and then go again. And that worked. I did probably I probably did in there, what, 4 or 5 of those tractors that way. I mean, so that was a common thing. But once we figured that out, I don't know if the word spread or it just always, it's funny. It always seems like you get a tractor in for some reason to do something to it, no matter what it was. If it was a reverse gear out or whatever, and you think, okay, that's great. And then before long, there'd be 2 more tractors come in with the same issue. It was like everything came in a lump sum. Or it was like somebody'd bring in an 8N Ford to work on, which nobody liked to work on. And then before you know it, there was half a dozen of them there. It was just like people just all had the same problem at the same time or something. But anyway, I know we worked on these a lot. And so the moral of my story is they're pretty good old tractors. It's just, you gotta be up on the maintenance because they have so much that depends on the hydraulics, and there's a lot that can go wrong in a hurry if you don't. So it's well worth the effort for this guy, for me to fix the leaks that I see, because you know how it is. You get into doing something out there and whatever, and you say, well, I'm not going to quit now, I'm just going to keep going, I'm almost done. Well, if you let these go too far, you will be done, because yeah, they don't, that rear end's not forgiving if you run it out of oil. So that's the plan. Probably not a very interesting video, but I'm kind of assessing while we're doing this the things that I think we're going to need to fix this up. And I think really, other than O-rings, I need to order a valve cover gasket, and I think we're good to go. I'm not sure that, are these filters leaking? We did some of these, but these weren't nearly as bad as the smaller ones, I don't think. Maybe I'm thinking of something else. I don't know. I probably should wash this up really good before I make my final judgments. But if I wash all that trash off, like I said, it definitely needs a valve cover gasket, because that's what's doing all that running down. But if we do that, fix this leak over there, figure out what's leaking here, if anything, I think he'll be good to go. Change his oil. This shouldn't take that long. I don't know that he's in a huge hurry for it, but he said he wanted to spread fertilizer with it, because the other tractor he has is a 3010 John Deere, and he said it's not quite heavy enough for the task. So yeah, he told me, he said he had a new piece of glass to put in there. I'm not sure what happened there, but life happens, you know. So overall though, I think it's a pretty good tractor. I mean, it's not beat up, it's not rotted up. A lot of these were really bad. It's got a little bit, but not near like I've seen them, you know, all this gone. So pretty decent upkeep on it. I know he's the second owner, so you know, I don't know how many years that works out to that they had it. Well, I guess you could do the math from 70s up till the 2000s, you know. But I'd say its biggest issue is it's probably going to be needing back tires some point in its future, because looks like they're kind of on borrowed time. They're not quite as bad as my cousin's, but they're getting there, you know. I was looking at all this to see if I don't think it's worth tearing apart his hydraulic valves to do anything right now. I don't think they're leaking that bad. Some of the stuff you can do with it on the tractor, but not really. And that's kind of a trick too. I always said on these, I don't want to go down a tangent again on how stuff's made, but working on it with this cab, They made a big boo-boo when they made this. They should have made this floor pan come out. They should have made a panel in there that you could unbolt so that you could get to the bolts and the lines for this valve. Because when you got to take that out to rebuild it, it is a pain. And it could very easily, there's even a flat spot in there that's doing nothing. They could have made that a panel that would come out. And that is something that I think if I owned one of these, I think I would saw up on the cab and I would start making improvements like that to make it easier to service that. I would make this into a door somehow. Like I said, that does come out, but why? Why didn't they just make it a door? Look how easier it would be to just open that up. So, but yeah, I mean, if one of these comes along cheap, I wouldn't mind owning one, but actively going to look for one, I don't know. I would like to have that 7000 because it lived right across the road over there, and I saw it my whole life running around. But of course those are only 100 some horsepower tractor, whereas this is like 140 horse tractor. So, and it's got a heavier rear end than the other one. So yeah, they're out there, friends. But what I'm saying is we got some work to do, and there will be more content because we're going to be working on this. So I will get a valve cover gasket on the way, and I will get the necessary filters. I think he got me all the filters except for he couldn't see the number on this one, and I'm pretty sure I know what it is. So but yeah, when we take that loose, we're gonna go all the way through it, and I think we'll just take it out of the frame and replace all the O-rings in it, clean it up, put it back. And then the valve cover is going to be the biggest probably headache. I hope I hope there isn't a bigger headache than that, but sure. So I suppose we will call this one here. Not very interesting, mainly just a talking video, but you know, sometimes that's the way she goes. As always, if you enjoy my videos, give them a thumbs up. That helps out the channel, and it doesn't cost you anything. Leave a comment. Tell me that you liked it, or tell me that you hated it. Tell me I'm a moron. I really don't care, but anything that you say helps us out too. So thank you again, as always, for watching, and I will see you in the next one.